Thank you so much for coming.
It's no problem, really.
I don't have your interview in front of me. I think
Yeah.
it's probably en route. We've been actually
That's
traveling
okay.
for the last week. So forgive me, I'll probably ask you a
That's
few
fine.
more questions. What we're going to talk about is a little bit about where you grew up, what it was like, a little bit about your family. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the actual invasion. What country are you from?
Poland.
Poland. Okay, so we're going to talk about the invasion. And we're going to talk about, are you a camp survivor?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, then we're going to talk about the
Yeah.
camps, and then we're going to talk a little bit about liberation.
About what?
About the liberation and what you
Oh,
might remember.
yeah. Oh,
Okay?
I
So
remember very well.
feel free to
Yeah.
speak openly and freely. I may stop you along the way if I have some questions, if that's
Yeah,
okay.
perfect.
And then we'll just go from there, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so just tell me a little bit about where you grew up.
I was born in Poland in a city called Lodz. Lodz was a very industrial city. The population was about 600,000, and half of the 600,000 were Jewish people. The other half were Polish Catholics and a lot of German Volksdeutsch, people that came from Germany to settle there. Since there was such a large Jewish population, I hardly knew anybody that was not a Jew there. I remember when I went to school, the school was a public school, but only Jewish children went there. And what I remember the best is the first day I went to a public school, and it was another one that was closer to my house. And I always tell this story because it's more or less how it was for Jewish people there. We were sitting in the classroom, two girls in a, how do you call it, on a bench, and in front of us, the teacher asked us our names, and then she said, who can read and write? And since I had two older sisters and my mother, I knew how to read and write. And I said I could, and she asked me to read something. And the girl that was sitting next to me, she said, you dirty Jew. Since I was so smart, I must be a Jew. Well, I said, I am not a dirty Jew, and I took the inkwell that was there and I poured on her blonde hair. And I left it, and I said, I'll never come back here, and I went home. I suppose my father had probably some trouble from me, but he was very proud of me, he never said. And then I went to another school that were only Jewish kids, and it was wonderful.
Was that your first encounter with anti-Semitism that you?
Oh, no, that was not the first encounter. We knew that it was there, you know. But since I was a little girl, I didn't have the occasion to meet with whatever it was. I came from a family where there were 7 children in our family. My father married a nice lady, and she died in the First World. I think, I don't know, I think she died from typhoid or whatever. And she had 3 children. Then my father met another lady, it was my mother, and there were 4 more children, so there were 7 children at all. The first 3 kids were a lot younger, older than I was. There was my sister Regina, my brother David Leib, and then the third one was Hella. By the time I was growing up, the 2 older people, Regina and David, were married, and each of them had two boys. And my older sister Hella, when she reached the age of 18, she went to Belgium to study, because in Poland, you know, it was very hard for Jewish people to go to university. Most people that could afford it went to France, Belgium, and eventually also they went to Germany and Austria. That was before things turned so bad for Jewish people. Well, my home life was, my parents were Orthodox Jews, and my home life was, when I look back, it was just like a wonderful dream. It was just warm and loving, and I lived in a house that I never knew how many brothers and sisters I had, because whoever needed help being somewhere, he came to stay with us. I remember 3, 4 people that I was so heartbroken when they left us finally to be on their own, because it was just a kind of life that it was just wonderful, really. We knew very well, what was the Jewish situation in Poland, but this time, I don't know why my parents stayed in there, but that's the way it was. And later, when it was so very terrible, there was no place for us to go anywhere.
Tell me about the invasion and what you remember.
The invasion I remember very well. I think it was the 2nd day of September that we already saw the Germans in the street. Now, I was 21 years old, and I was much more optimistic than I am now. And I remember sitting at the window, and I figured myself, maybe it will last 2 or 3 months, but then the French and the British will come and it will be liberated, because by this time we already knew that they entered the war also. I remember shortly before the invasion, the summer before the invasion, I saw a French film called La France veille. That means the French are watching. And they showed us all the wonderful things that they did to save the France and to save the world, the La Ligne Maginot and everything. And I was sure that they will be, that they will save us anyway. Of course, you know how things turned out anyway.
Tell me about the day that you were separated from your family.
Oh, from my family. Well, I think people, what people didn't really know what they were doing. We were living in Lodz, and Warsaw was a city 100 kilometers away. And Lodz was a part of Poland that was right in how do you call it, that the German took over for them. And my parents thought that maybe Warsaw will be a better place for us. So they stayed in Lodz, they two, and they sent all the children to Warsaw. My older brother and his family went there, and they took all the children, myself and my 2 brothers and sister with them. And my parents stayed in Lodz, and we thought that we could meet later, but we never did. For some reason, they couldn't leave or whatever, and I never saw them again later. And when I went to Warsaw, I had my fiancé with me, Stephan Diament, and he left his family and he went with me too, and we were married a few days later. I remember before the war, I was discussing with my parents that I didn't want a big Jewish wedding that will cost a fortune. I just want to get married, and that's it. And I got my wish, because and when we came to Warsaw, my husband was a printer. He came from a family that was in the printing business for about 200 years. And that's what we do in Memphis too. When we came to live in Memphis, for a few years he worked for somebody else, and then we opened our own printing business here.
So you were 21 years old. You had married Stephan.
Yeah, I was, yeah.
Your wedding day was...
Excuse me?
Your wedding day, the family was not there.
No, but my older brother that also lived in Warsaw was there, and his wife and a few friends. And we just got married. That was the most important thing. I think that the Germans forbade Jewish people to get married, but we never paid attention to whatever they said or what. Because whatever you did, you were threatened with death penalty, so it didn't matter what.
Tell me about that time. What did you really understand was happening? Really,
I understand very well. You know, it was not a surprise to me, and it was not a surprise to the Jews in Poland. We knew that our lives, you know, even before the war, you know, our lives were hanging this way and that way. We always had to look for a way to, for a way to survive. And yeah. And we knew very well what was waiting for us on the Hitler. We knew it very well. But, each day was a day more, and maybe something will happen. I remember the day of the June 6th. We didn't know June 6th, but this was the day that I guess I was in Auschwitz or whatever. And for some reason, somebody knew, and, you know, it came... we knew that about Japanese war. We knew about other wars. I don't know how it came to us, but we knew about that thing. And I remember my father once told me that I was a lucky person that never will happen to me. And I guess that, all the time of the war and the camps and everything, I never thought that I'm going to stay there. I always knew that I will survive. I don't know how, but, if you doubt about yourself, if you lost faith, you were gone right away.
Tell me a little bit about that. How old were you when... Were you sent to a ghetto first before you went to Auschwitz?
Oh yeah, I was
tell
living.
Me a little bit about the ghetto.
I was living in Warsaw. I'm sure you read many things about the ghetto, and.
Tell me about your experience with the ghetto. What do you remember the most?
What I remember the most is seeing children dead in the streets. There were a lot of children didn't have any parents. The parents were sent somewhere. They left the kids. And that's what I remember the most, seeing children. I remember there was one little boy, Ananias Hamburger. He was about 5 years old. And I saw him in the street, and he was sitting and crying. And I took him to my house, to my room. And he lived with us for about 6 months, and then he died. I don't know what he died from. But this is what I remember the most. Children dead in the streets. There was, we were always hungry. For 5 years, I was hungry all the time. And, it was not only my situation. Everybody was hungry.
Were you there with Stephan?
Yes, I was there in Stephan. I was there till May 1943. And I'll tell you, the most beautiful day was April 19, when finally, we stood up and we shoot the German. It was just a wonderful day, really. We just...
Okay, you left the ghetto and you went...
I didn't leave the ghetto.
You didn't?
No. We were taken, we were taken and we were deported to Majdanek.
Okay, and then tell me about that.
Majdanek was a camp like Auschwitz.
Were you deported with Stephan?
Yes, I was deported with Stephan. And then after 2 or 3 days, we were separated. He was sent to another place. He was sent to a place where they were building planes for the Messerschmitt whatever. And I was... stayed in Majdanek for a couple of months, and then they sent us to another place called Radom. In Radom, there was still a ghetto, and we were sent to the ghetto, and we were, I have a problem with some years ago, I had a little stroke, and I don't find words anymore.
Okay. No, it's okay. That's okay. From there, that you were at a concentration camp.
Yes.
There. What did you do there? What was your job?
We didn't do anything. Whatever they told us to do, most of the time we were carrying stones from one place to another. I remember one incident in my Majdanek camp. We were taking camps from one place to another, close to the close to the entrance or whatever. And other side of the entrance, there were a bunch of German soldiers standing there and talking about somebody. And there was a lady and a little girl. She was maybe 4 or 5 years old, I suppose. She was a wife of an officer, and she lived there. And then from another place, there came a soldier, and he had a little Jewish baby, maybe 5, 6 months old, and he dragged it by his legs. And when he came closer to that group, he threw the baby in the air and shot it. And the little girl that was standing there with her mother, she clapped. She said, "Noch einmal, once more."
You remember seeing that?
Oh, I remember hearing that. I mean, sometimes at night I don't sleep, you know. Last night I didn't sleep too good. I mean, it was all fresher to me. And I mean, seeing a little girl, a young little girl, whatever. I was in the...
From that camp, you were at that camp for how long?
I was in that camp about 2 months, and then they took about 500 or 600 people. They put us on a train and they sent us to Radom. Radom was, they still had the ghetto, and we worked for them. I forgot we did whatever they wanted us to do. I remember I made baskets, I painted houses and whatever. And then we stayed there till about till the summer of 44, about August, and they sent us to Auschwitz from there.
And what was Auschwitz like for you?
Well, you know, I didn't have, I didn't stay too long in Auschwitz. I stayed there maybe 4 or 5 weeks.
How long had you gone without seeing Stephan at this point?
Not too long, about 3 months.
3 months.
I mean, he was in that camp, it was called Mielec. There was a big factory for Messerschmitt, and he was there, and he worked there as a mechanic. Although he was a printer, but they didn't need printers, whatever. He was kind of a man that did everything with his hands he could do. And he was very resourceful, really. There were a lot of if people from the country that came to work there, they were Polish people. And if they needed something, they needed a little, whatever, a ring or a basket or whatever, they came to Stephan, and he always find time something, and he got a piece of bread for it. So he was in pretty good shape. I mean, he had a little more to eat.
And you were liberated?
Whatever, you know. After I was sent to Radom, we stayed there till about a few months, whatever, and then we were sent to Auschwitz. That was when the Russians were getting very close to Poland or whatever. And in Auschwitz, I didn't stay too long, maybe 4 or 5 weeks. And one day, you know, they took all the women from a certain block. We were told to undress, and we were walking in the street. And there were people that were watching us. And the one that, hi. Yeah, here.
It's okay.
The one that looked a little better were taken to the right side, and the one with left side, I was on the right side. And there were about 500 women with me, and we were sent to a work camp. It was called Hindenburg. I think it belonged to the Krupp company. Over there we were, doing, working for the armaments, whatever we did. And I was, things that were a little better since we worked for them. I mean, we got maybe a little more eat soup or whatever. I remember one day in my whole story, I was very sick, and that was after lunch. They had a little more soup, and they gave me the little more soup, and I got terrible sick from eating some more, whatever. Anyway,
You actually got sick from eating more
from
soup.
eating more soup.
And you, tell me about, what do you remember about the liberation? You had heard rumors that the Russians were coming?
Oh no, we were not. We were there in the Hindenburg camp till November '45, and the Russians were coming. So we were. They took us out, on the Death March. We were marching toward Western Germany, and
Tell
I
me
think
about
we
the
were.
march.
Yeah. There is a painter in Memphis, Paul Penchner. He's a Hungarian. I don't know what he did in the war, but anyway. And somehow he heard about that march. Maybe he was there also, I don't know. But he painted one of those pictures, that march. And he gave it to me, and I gave it to my son later.
Tell me about the march.
The march, whatever you read about it, that was it,
Tell me about your experience with the march.
Well, I guess, I was young and I made it. I don't know, I made it.
What do you remember most about it? You
It
feeling
was
fear?
cold, it was cold, and it was hungry, and it was just the end. I guess in my group that we went, everybody was young then. If you were old, you were dead. But a bunch of us made it we were taken to Bergen-Belsen. And we walked all the way from Poland to Bergen-Belsen, whatever. Right now I cannot walk 100 yards.
How do you attribute your survival?
I was young.
Young?
I was young and healthy. Basically.
There were lots of young and healthy
Yes,
people.
I know, of course.
How do you think personally you survived? How did you make sense of what was happening to you?
I didn't make any sense, we were not thinking about anything. We made a decision. We had a lot of friends, and we just supported each other the best we could. I remember I had a typhoid fever about 1 month before the end of the war. I guess that was the same story with Anne Frank. And, I was laying on the floor, and I had a wonderful friend, Ida Tirangel. And she did the best she could. She gave me some water once in a while, and that was the only medicine I had. And I had another friend there, Helena Finkelstein. She was the most gorgeous person that I ever saw. She was so beautiful anyway. And I remember one time Helen told me, "Don't worry, you'll be okay, you'll be all right." And I was thinking to myself, of course I will be all right. I always knew that I'll be all right. And then when
that comes from your father?
No, this is the way I was, whatever. And no, I had a grandfather that was like that. And then when I came out of the coma, Helen was dead. Helen Finkelstein, this beautiful young girl, she was dead. And she always gave me courage that I would live, and I did. And
tell me about the day of liberation.
The day of liberation, it was a morning of April 15. And we already knew for a few days the German guards disappeared, and there were some Hungarian soldiers there. And we didn't get anything to eat or drink for a few days because there was nobody there. And we were just sitting outside and waiting for something to happen. And then they came some tanks.
Had you thought about escaping?
There was no way to escape. First I had a number, that's nothing, but there was no way to escape. In Poland, if you saw my husband's picture, he looked like a Jew. Polish people were blonde and blue-eyed, and he looked like King David. There was no way he could escape. The first thing. And the moment did you see the movie Pianist?
No, not yet.
Oh, no. Well, Anyway, this was the story more or less of the Warsaw Ghetto from his point of view, because we didn't. But there was no place to go. I knew a few people that tried to escape, and they didn't go maybe 1,000 yards, and that was the end of them.
So you saw the
And-
soldiers coming in.
They came on the tanks, and they looked at us, and we looked at them, and that was the most beautiful and the saddest things of ours, because we didn't, while we were there, we didn't think much about what happened to our families. I don't know, maybe there was something in our brain, but we did. And this was the moment that we realized that was the end of our home life, of anything. We were just alone by ourselves. And what also happened, that so many of us died there because we started to eat and eat and eat, and that was the end, really. And the British took care of us the best way they could, But the war was still going on, and they had their own troubles. And after all, we were Jews, so what's the big deal?
How soon until you saw Stephan again?
Well, what happens, after the war, when I was in a better shape, whatever, I had a sister who lived in Belgium, Hella, the one that went there to study, and she stayed there. And so I tried to contact her by the Red Cross, and she was still alive, which I knew. The Belgian people were a little more decent than the other people. And I tried my best to join her. And of course, I didn't know anything about my husband or my brothers or sisters or anything. And we always told each other, whoever survived will go and join her. And I went there in July. And I remember when my sister saw me, she said, "You look better than I did." And I did look better. 3 months later, I was weighing maybe 3 times what I used to do. And we left our names wherever there was, the place was, in camps and other people in the Red Cross. And I said, "What if my husband is alive? He's gonna find me." And I was there 3 weeks at my sister's house, and one day the bell rings, and I opened the door, and he was there.
What was that like?
Well, it was the start of everything. It was wonderful, really. And I remember he was wearing a British uniform. I don't know how, a soldier's uniform.
At that moment, how long had it been since you'd seen each other?
It was 2 years and 3 months. And of course, being me, I always knew that he would survive.
From there, where did you live?
We lived there till April 1952. We lived there for a few years. My husband, I'm going to tell you how stupid we were after the war with everything that happened to us. And we were still so innocent and, whatever. He came to Belgium. He had to tell the people, the Belgian that he wants to go and join his wife. So they say, "You cannot come here. We're going to send your wife to Germany." And he said, "No, I don't want her to live to Germany. I want to hear." So they said, "If you promise us that you will work in the coal mines, we'll let you go." So he said yes. He didn't do anything. He just said yes, and they let him go in. And since he promised, he went to work in the coal mine. And he stayed there for 6 months, and one day we opened our eyes and we said, what are we doing here? And since he was a printer, he went to work for a printing company. And we stayed there till 1952, and we had a little boy that was born in 1947, Michael.
And what brought you to the United States?
Excuse me?
What brought you to the United States? Was it the printing business?
No, you know, we just, we told us, I mean, I didn't want to go to live in New York. I didn't like big cities. So they say, would you like to go to Memphis? And I say, oh, yes. You know, Memphis is on the Mississippi. They will have beaches and everything. And we came here, we came here the 5th of April 1952. And a week later, I had another baby.
You've been here ever since?
Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah.
And you like it here?
Yes, I do. I really like it here, yeah.
That's great. And your husband passed away?
My husband passed away in December '85 from cancer. Yeah. Well, this is more or less the story. Yeah.
Well, I thank you very much for sharing it with us.
Oh, you're welcome.